Welcome to the Noir Poise podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise. We've been married for over 4 years now. We're still new at this. And we've been together for who knows what. I could never put my finger on the exact moment, but we've known each other for over a decade.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to say.
Well over a decade.
Yeah, because I met you when we were, I think, 18 or 19.
Yeah.
But we weren't friends or anything then. And then we were friends for a couple years, and then we started having feelings, so on and so forth. But that's besides the point. Point is, we've been in each other's lives for a really long time now. And I feel like we've seen so many different versions of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. But somehow, some way, at this point in time, I feel like we're closer than we've ever been. We've been stuck in a house together for how many years now? Since COVID, where like you started working remote, I was working remote, and now we're both home like on a regular basis. And I ain't tired of you, kid.
You know, during the pandemic, that's when I realized we had a special bond.
Yeah.
Because I heard so many other people say that they were being driven crazy by their partner. Because when you really think about it, you're at work 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then you come home for maybe 4 hours, you're cooking, cleaning,
yeah, you're doing
showering,
things, so you're
whatever.
Not really like
and then you go to sleep for another 8 hours. So you don't really get to spend time with
those you live with.
Yeah, with those you live with. But the pandemic kind of forced everyone to be around each other all day.
Because there was nothing to do.
And I heard horror stories from like my colleagues and other people about how they want to strangle their partner. But I like you, you know? I was
right?
You know, I love living with her.
Ditto. No, I really had to think about it. I'm like, yo, even though we've been together or we've known each other this long, when I go out, I'm still like, yeah, I want to go back home. You know, I'd rather be with Sam, or like even discussing what we were discussing earlier about like our, you know, holiday plans, so on and so forth. And I randomly started thinking about like my girls wanting to link up. And before we were married, my friends used to always do like girls trips and stuff like that. But now I'm like, I wouldn't even want to go, which is wild. I wouldn't want to go because I'm like, I'd rather be, not that I don't have fun with my friends, I do. But I'm like, I'd rather be home with my husband and daughter.
That's sweet.
No, seriously though, I'd rather be home. Even if the daughter wasn't in the picture, I feel like even before she was around, I was like, yeah, I'd rather do this with Sam, or I'd rather go here with Sam. But I find that interesting because I know I've changed in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Even the past like 5 years, I feel like I'm like a whole different person when it comes to certain things. And I know you've changed in so many different ways. The people who are closest to us may recognize like we're still the same people at the core, you know, like some of our qualities and so on and so forth. But like, you know, little things like what we're willing to tolerate, what we're interested in, what we want to do, how often we want to go out. Like there's a lot of little things that change as you journey through life. And we've experienced a lot of life-changing moments, you know, moments that naturally will shift your way of thinking, shift the way you act. And we've gone through those things so far, and we've shifted in drastic ways. But you've always been there, and vice versa. I've always been there, and we've always grown closer throughout those moments. I say all that to say because I hear a lot of couples, or even on like TV, you know, different couples, why people are going through divorces or whatever the case is, you often hear them say, you know, like, they're not the same person I met.
Yeah.
You've changed, or they have all of a sudden differences that they can't meet in the middle about. That's when it hit me that a lot of people don't really grow with one another as they're going through those changes.
Yeah.
And I had to ask myself, like, well, because I honestly don't know what it is that we do. If I'm real with you, I just feel like we go about life making sure we communicate and we try to learn about one another as we're going through those changes. But I'm like, how would I word that in a way where I can explain to someone what's the best thing to do when your partner is changing? So the conversation today is going to be interesting to discuss, but I wanted to ask you, do you believe people can change? And I ask that because I often hear people say that people can't change. They're always going to be who they are. They may try to act different, but they don't change. I personally disagree, but I wanted to get your take on it. Do you feel like people can change?
I think people can change, but they're unable to change on their own.
Really?
So I always say this to you where people are literally like sponges. It's input, output. No matter what we think, we can only put out what's been put in. So when people change, in my opinion, either two things happen. One, they've always been that person, but they were just good at hiding it. And it got to a point where it just finally came out.
That's
or
a good point.
Some kind of life circumstance or situation, a traumatic experience causes people to change. You may have a friend or someone you know, or we all have a friend or someone we know who maybe grew up in the church and they were in ministry and something traumatic happened in their lives that they decide, you know what, I'm done with religion or I'm done with my faith. Something traumatic caused them to change, but in it of themselves, they're unable to change on their own. So I think people definitely can change, but it doesn't come without some kind of external force.
I like that you said that because I looked up some data and I found that on average, this is just an estimate, people go through major changes, major life changes every 12 to 18 months.
Really?
Yeah. But they go through what's quote unquote called life quakes every 3 to 5 years. So a life quake is something that's like so altering that it literally just shakes your life. So I imagine that would be like death.
Yeah.
Or children being born, things like that. And those life changes, for me, I feel like those things tend to change the behaviors of someone or how they view certain things about life. So when I saw that, I was like, so how are people changing with one another? You know what? I'm curious to hear like the different perspectives because I have an idea, of course, our personal experience, but I'm interested to hear like what other people are saying. I would love to hear like other people's feedbacks on how do they change through changes or how do they keep the connection through changes, because realistically it's inevitable.
Yeah.
We're all going to change. And I always say this, I feel like if someone's not changing for the better, you got to question if they're actually living.
Yeah.
You know, because if there's no type of evolution, because you should always be evolving, in my opinion. I like to say it's not that you're changing, you're evolving, because I think changing can be negative or positive. Whereas evolving, you're growing, you're adapting to life and growing as life is throwing things at you.
I love that.
Yeah. So I feel like if people are going through major changes every 12 to 18 months and life quakes every 3 to 5 years, this is a conversation that a lot of people need to talk about or hear. How do you connect with someone? How do you grow with someone as they go through those changes? Because while we may be together, we may not experience the same changes together. There are certain things that may occur in life that may not affect me the way that it affects you and vice versa. So how do you continue to connect with that person through that evolution and through those changes?
I would definitely say if one person's changing, have the mindset of we're both changing. One thing that's worked for us is when you were changing, I didn't look at the situation as, oh, she's changing, I don't know who she is or who she's becoming. I saw it as an opportunity for us both to change. And I think it was vice versa, which is why we always grew together. And not to paint a fairy tale picture out there, there were times where I'm sure even in our evolution, we slowly drifted or slowly started drifting. But thankfully, we were always able to bring it back and just discuss what we're feeling, why we're changing, and any underlying reasons that the other person wasn't aware of. So like we always say, it comes back to communication.
Yeah.
if you feel yourself changing, then it's your responsibility to communicate that with your partner.
Absolutely.
I could even think of a few times when I came to you and I said, you know what, this is what I'm feeling now. I don't know exactly why or where I'm going with this, but I just wanted you to know that.
Mm-hmm.
So now if 2 years down the line, there's another change, we could always tie it back like, oh yeah, I remember when you did discuss that and we talked about it a few times. So I watched as you were growing and I grew with you.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think most people try to change in secret and they don't show anything until they're fully changed. So
that's good.
We've heard people say things all the time where they just change overnight.
It's like it didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, I think it's humanly impossible for someone to just change overnight.
Right.
There has to be some kind of build up leading to that. Unfortunately, as I just said, people tend to have that build up more internally so that when it finally does come out, it creates a whole lot of friction within a relationship.
Right.
So I noticed that even when I was changing in ways I was unsure about, because I was able to discuss it with you and it was a judgment-free zone, it wasn't an opportunity for you to condemn me or challenge me. You really were just a listening ear. It allowed us to grow stronger together. And there were times when the changes I was experiencing, you would do some background research or you would have some knowledge about it and actually help shed light as to why I'm feeling these changes or why I'm going that direction. So that's the beauty of keeping your changes open and honest, is it naturally creates a closer bond. And it also allowed me to have a greater appreciation for you and our relationship because I saw how that wasn't common out in society, but because I was able to be honest with you and because it was so well received, it just naturally made me appreciate this relationship more. And of course, if there's pros, there's cons.
Always.
If there's pros, then cons. So one of the major issues I think that change has brought in our relationship is when there is something that, for example, I was okay with or you were okay with before, that it's no longer okay now.
Yeah.
I think that's when all of a sudden it's, okay, how do we navigate this? Because I was operating under a different assumption. This podcast is a great example where my personality, as we covered thoroughly in other episodes, I would rather sweep things under the rug. I didn't really want to vocalize anything. I prefer to internalize. Even if I was really hurt or offended, I just told myself, you know what, you'll get over it, or man up, whatever it might be. But I started to become more vocal about situations.
I think after having our daughter, it forced us to, well, at least it forced you to try to be more vulnerable because we didn't have as much time as we did before to have those connections. Our time was limited. So it was like, we have to be able to express what we're feeling, what we're going through individually, so that way the other person can have a little bit of grace on them. You know what I mean? So I think that was definitely like the year of her being born. We were forced to reach a new level when it came to vulnerability.
Yeah. I don't want to use the word guilt, but I've definitely felt bad because in me being vulnerable, I would often bring up things in the past that you were either unaware of or you thought we were totally over with, but it was always bothering me. And I just never said anything because I wasn't vulnerable. So it made the changes very uncomfortable. And I can't even imagine how you felt having to hear about things that, you probably didn't even know was occurring internally with me, or things that maybe we thought we had settled.
Right.
So that part of me changing, becoming more vocal, although it is bringing a lot of positivity, it did bring some cons, meaning it forced us to kind of, take a shovel and undo things that we thought was buried and over with. But that's the thing with change, where as the growth and evolution come, sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty and get a little uncomfortable. You'll experience that where when you're changing, even if it's for positive reasons, there will be some kind of negativity that you have to deal with.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I guess it's perspective, because although there were moments where it's just like, now I got to listen to this that happened like 2 years ago. Or, we talked about this like 6 months ago. Here we are again. It's annoying in the moment. I'm not going to lie. But the reality is it's perspective, because when you see the positive that comes out of having that discussion again, some parts of the story were untold. So being able to hear your significant other express certain things about a particular situation that happened, and then you being able to give your perspective so they then can understand where you were coming from or whatever the case is, while that conversation in the moment may seem conflicting or it may seem a little bit like an issue, it always led to us resolving situations. It always led to us getting to a space that made us wiser, more aware, and have more grace on the other person when we come out of having that conversation. So while they may seem like cons in the moment, they're actually pros, because with growth comes uncomfortability. You can't be comfortable when you're growing. And that's why I say, for me, the term change, I like to use evolving to replace it. Once you conquer that space, you then realize that it was actually a pro instead of a con. So for me, it's perspective, because like all those moments, I'd never viewed them as cons. It was more so like, dag, okay, I thought we were over this, but it's not like it lasted days or weeks. We have our conversations in that moment and we have them. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not like it led to an argument or a debate or made us feel a type of way where it made us act different for a while. It was, okay, we're having this tough conversation right now. Let's get to the bottom of it. We got to the bottom of it. And that was that. So for me, no, I don't think that was necessarily a con with that type of change, because I always, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I always promote that type of change in both of us, especially with you, like being more vulnerable and being more open, because I want a healthy man. At the end of the day, it's going to make you healthier mentally and emotionally, and that will ultimately make you more healthy physically. So that's what's important to me. But yes, that's what a lot of people may be feeling in the moment of going through certain changes or evolutions, is the getting the hands dirty and what they may have to deal with in the moment of expressing that to a significant other who doesn't get it, or who was used to who you were, and how you operated, what your interests were, what you were able to tolerate, because that's real. Being able to tolerate something at one moment and then you realize, no, I'm not able to tolerate this anymore. And the spouse is looking like, well, I've been doing this. What's the problem now? That's like something that I feel like may be really common in relationships. I was looking at some stats that was simply discussing like divorce rates and stuff like that, and some of the issues that people tend to have. And I found that 40 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce here in America.
It's wild.
That's scary. Not scary for me. You here forever. Okay. But it's scary to think that so many people are, it's going to sound messed up for me to say this, but for me, I view it as like giving up in a sense. But that's first marriages. Then second marriages, which shocked me, because you would assume that it would be lower, because second time around, you would hope that people figured some things out or learned from their first experience. But it was 60 to 67%.
So it was even higher.
It's even higher on second marriages. So I really started thinking about it. And this is just my opinion, my perspective. Could be wrong, because it's my opinion, but I started thinking about, I'm like, what could make people fail the second time around? Or not even, let me not use the term fail, but what could make people go into a similar situation as when it comes to marriage, like get married again and still get to a place where they're like, nah, this isn't it, or maybe I chose the wrong person, or I can't deal with this, so on and so forth. Like, what could that be? And of course, communication, I feel like, is a big issue. I really don't think we know how to communicate properly. And that's something we're still learning till this day. I think everyone wants people to communicate with them the way they want to be communicated to, or the way they grew up communicating. And understanding communication styles, I think, is so important. But not just that, the ego thing that we've been discussing. I feel like a lot of us has very large egos, and we're not willing to back down or let someone else win a battle for the sake of we think we're right in the moment. It's always like we have our guard up, we're defensive, we have to prove a point, so on and so forth. And we can go on a list of so many things that like could potentially lead to this. But seeing that stat made me look up like, okay, what are some random causes that people file for divorce for? Aside from like the obvious infidelity, right? Communication problems and conflict came up at 31.9%. Irreconcilable differences came up at 57.7%. And then I also saw like a lot of people said that there was too much arguments occurring. So I'm like, okay, so this all ties down to communication.
Yeah.
Which is crazy that something can end that way because you guys simply don't know how to communicate effectively. And I heard someone say this and I'll never forget it because people always say communication is key. Me, I always say, yeah, communication is key, but I feel like understanding is what really unlocks the door. That's my perspective. But I heard someone say this and it made me kind of shift the way I viewed it with the whole understanding thing. He was like, relationships last when people know how to argue. And I was like, yeah, that's true, because you can communicate all you want, but if the other person is not listening or understanding, it's going nowhere. But let's say the person is listening and understanding. If they're not dissecting that information in a way that they can then communicate it back to you or have a healthy debate, and I think that's the issue is people don't know how to have healthy debates where we can talk about something. We have this all the time where we're just like, I don't agree with you, but I respect your decision. I respect how you view it. And then we'll circle back another time and continue the conversation. But again, ego, having to be right or wanting to be right, having to prove your point, being defensive, all those things lead to people being unable to argue effectively. Because I personally don't think there's anything wrong with having debates and having a back and forth or expressing yourself, getting a better understanding of the person's views. But people tend to lead to yelling, being disrespectful, talking out of emotion. It doesn't become logic anymore. It becomes more emotion. And I think that's where it starts to be toxic and unhealthy for the relationship. So seeing all of that information and like dissecting it in my brain, and I'm like, wow, it's crazy to think that so many relationships end up going this route simply because of communication problems, conflict, and irreconcilable differences. And that stems from change.
I always wonder what happens from the moment people get married to the time those people get divorced, because you'll hear about stories of people being together for 2 years is wonderful, but then 6 months into the marriage and they can't stand each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wonder what it is about the marriage aspect that changes people's perception.
Mm-hmm.
But I think society teaches us that change is always for the worse.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I think that's 100% true.
That's probably what happens when people are in a relationship and the moment they get married, it's kind of like a timestamp. You're not changing after this.
Yeah. You expect them to remain the person that you fell in love with.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be, an actual marriage or marriage ceremony. It could be just a simple timeline where I've known this person for 2 years. After this time frame, you're not supposed to change. What you eat is what you eat. What you wear, what you dress like is what you dress like. Your friends shouldn't change. And the moment that something starts to be a little different than what it was before, I think society teaches us that that's a warning sign. And that's unfortunate because change can be good. It could also be bad, but it can be good. But a question I had for you is, what if you notice that your partner is changing, but in your opinion, they're changing for the worse?
Communication, but also observing. Like, I'm big on paying attention to the little things and seeing what's causing this person to change. Because I've heard of situations where, like you said, they'll marry someone and this person is a type of way. And then they'll say like, oh yeah, he changed, or oh, she changed. Like, she don't do things like this anymore. He doesn't do these type of things. Not saying that you should blame yourself, but there's two parts of every story. For example, if I'm in a situation where in the beginning of the relationship, I was very respectful and I made sure that if I had male friends, you had knowledge of those male friends. We hung out with that male together kind of thing. That male was in a relationship. Later down the line, that male now is no longer in a relationship and I'm hanging out with that male alone. Even if it's innocent, that's a change that may make you very uncomfortable. So let's say you were the same where you had no female friends at all. You had no female friends, but you decided to have no female friends out of respect for me, not that you weren't able to make female friends. You just decided not to do it for the sake of being respectful to me and, having a boundary, so to say. But after you notice that I'm operating the way that I'm operating and you have a conversation with me, it seems to make no changes. I'm still doing what I want to do. And now you happen to have a friend who is simply that, just a friend. Let's say she's even married or whatever the case is. But because of what I've done, you now operate a little differently with the situation. Not saying it's right. You know what I mean? Not saying neither of these individuals are right, but in a situation like that where the spouse starts to operate differently and he starts to change, you have to question everything. You can't necessarily just be like, he changed, he never had female friends, all of a sudden now he has this female friend or whatever the case is. You have to look at the whole picture.
Right.
That may not have been like the greatest example, but in general, I feel like sometimes we have to look at the whole picture. You can't just be like, he changed or she changed, but look at what little things led to this change. Because like we said earlier, people don't change overnight. It's a buildup of little things. There may be a lot of things that's occurring that causes that person to change. Maybe it's that person having to internalize things, and now those internalized emotions are making them react a type of way. So for me, it's always going to go back to communication and not just communicating when you see an issue. And I think that's part of the problem because people tend to communicate about certain topics when they notice something is wrong.
And by that time, the emotions
It's
are already
too late.
involved too.
Yeah, not all the time, but a lot of times when you get to that point where you notice something's wrong, it's probably too late. So for me, and you know this about me, like I'm very inquisitive. We have random moments of having deep conversations about random things that have nothing to do with our relationship, but just to understand each other's perspectives, how we would go about acting or responding in a certain type of situations. If I hear a story, I'll randomly bring it to you and be like, what are your thoughts on this? But it's to be able to understand how you think and how you operate as you're evolving through life. Because the Sam that I met years ago is not going to do the same thing that he would do now in a certain situation. So I may have thought, we've had this conversation 7 years ago. This is how Sam would react to this type of situation. And through our life and how a lot has changed in 7 years. So now you won't operate and react the same way. It's my obligation to be able to connect with you in a way to get that information out of you. But it's also your responsibility to keep me in the loop.
Yeah.
It's really important to apply maintenance the same way we apply maintenance to our vehicles, to our bodies. You go every year for certain routine checkups. You go every couple months for whatever the case may be for your car. You have to get your tires rotated. You may need new brakes. You may need an oil change. It has to be maintained in order to run smoothly. And I view relationships the same way. So when it comes to changes, for me, that's the ultimate solution, is maintaining that relationship in a way, however that may look for each, because every relationship is different. So what it looks like for Ruth and Sam is not going to be for the next person, but applying maintenance on a regular basis, picking that person's brain to see what their thoughts are. How are they feeling? What are they going through outside of the home? What are they going through at work? What are they dealing with their family or friends? You know what I mean? Like little things like that will often shift someone's way of thinking and shift their behaviors little by little. And if you wait until that behavior or whatever that case is now is embedded in how they view things, and that's when you want to have a discussion, it's probably a little too late. And even if it's not too late, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
To get an understanding of where the person stands or even shift or get to where they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that communication will not only solve a lot of problems, but it'll prevent a lot of problems from starting to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a few years ago where, you expressed to me that, you want to take more time for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There was a point where we were always going out, whether it's with other people or just going out alone, and you expressed that, you know what, you just want to take some time to yourself to not be out in public as much.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a drastic change. But one thing that I always appreciate is that you communicated that with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you didn't do so, I think I would have ended up getting annoyed. Annoyed in the sense that maybe I wanted to go out and all of a sudden you just say no all the time.
Yeah.
Or I could understand, even from your friend's perspective, that if you didn't communicate that with them.
Yeah, they would be like, all of a sudden you're not coming around.
They would have said you changed, So,
I've heard that, believe it or not, yeah.
But because you always expressed that and communicated that clearly, I think it prevented a lot of unnecessary issues in not just in your friends' relationships, but even possibly in ours. So for the people listening out there who you're probably thinking to yourself, you feel like you're changing and you want to keep it to yourself a little bit, respect your privacy, of course. But I would always encourage you to keep the people involved updated, because you may think you're changing in secret, but they see something happening with you.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the common misconceptions, that you could just simply change and no one's ever going to know. One day it's going to pop out.
It comes out. It's obvious sometimes, yeah.
But it comes out with or without you realizing. And so I would definitely say, even if you don't want to have in-depth conversations at the moment, if you really care about this person, keep them updated as to why you may or may not be moving a certain way.
Right. I agree with that. But in the situation where now, like, the change has occurred, now what? In situations where you can't get with this change, like, how do you operate with someone when, like, a change is happening and you don't agree with this change?
I would say two things. One, you don't necessarily have to agree with it to support it. Because we tend to try to make our loved ones fit the vision we have.
That's good.
When that's realistically, that's unfair, because you wouldn't want them to do it to you as well. So I try to always give people, their space. If they're doing something that I don't agree with, I just ask myself, is it going to cause me to compromise my own judgment, my own discernment, my own relationship with God, whatever core values I have? If the answer is no, then I'm going to support you. But if I feel that by going with you with your change, I'm then compromising my core values, the truth is, unfortunately, sometimes this happens in life where you just have to walk away. We love to paint a picture of, no, everything is going to work out no matter what it takes. Sometimes the right thing to do is to walk away. So if you find yourself in a situation where a loved one is changing and you don't agree with the change, if you feel that you can't support them to that extent, then be honest with them.
Yeah.
Because better you're honest and you let them go live the life that they want to, versus they're dragging you with them at the same time you're holding them back and no one's winning.
Yeah, I feel that. That's the reality that sometimes that occurs, where you may not agree with that change. But I would say in a situation like that, maybe questioning why you don't agree with that change. Like you said, like, is it because it's the opposite of, like, your morals and values, or is it something selfish and you just don't want to have to deal with it? Because more times it's probably things we just don't want to have to deal with. We're used to this person doing this, that, and the third, and now they're like, no, I want more free time to live my life. And you're like, so I feel like there are certain situations where it's more selfish reasons than it is affecting our values and our morals. In cases where it is affecting our values and our morals or going against what we believe in, that I understand, where people are like, okay, these are differences that we can't figure out. Although there are ways to try to figure it out before walking away, of course. But that's another topic, I feel. But if it's not, if it's because you just don't want to deal with it, then you have to start looking at yourself and ask, why? Are you being selfish? Are you not having grace on this person? Are you preventing this person from reaching their full potential? And like we said before, if you always operate in a way where you're growing with your partner, where you're constantly trying to be involved in their growth, you'll have an understanding before it gets to a point like that, where you notice a drastic change and you're like, whoa, now what we doing? Again, for me, it just keeps tying back to the apply maintenance. Relationship maintenance is definitely a thing. It's definitely necessary. And I feel like it has to be applied on a regular basis, especially we're busy. Like everybody's busy. Everyone has their jobs and everyone has their goals. And, people are parenting out here. People are trying to do things for others, like responsibilities. Adulting is busy. So the little time that you have to spend with your significant other, make it meaningful. Don't let it be something where you're just sitting in front of a TV and watching a show. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with that every now and then, but apply the maintenance. Do meaningful things that will cater to that person's love language. Get certain emotions and certain discussions out there that you can learn about them as they continue to evolve. I think that's the big thing. As you're evolving, continue to learn one another and continue to fall in love with that version of one another as you're growing. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noirpoise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.